In the Newsroom is a production in partnership with Studio Stillwater. Every week, journalists from the Stillwater News Press invite listeners to join us in the newsroom and hear the story behind the stories. Hello and welcome to In the Newsroom. I'm Beau Simmons, editor of the Stillwater News Press. Joining me today, we have city editor Michelle Charles.
Hey.
And publisher Kevin Shields.
Hello.
How's everyone doing?
Doing pretty well.
Doing well.
Okay, last night, I get a call from Michelle. I'm almost home. Telling me
that I misspelled someone's name.
Misspelled someone's name.
Can we
change it?
To be fair, it was an uncommon spelling. However, I'm still responsible for checking that stuff. Right. And I did not.
So this is one thing. Tomorrow wasn't, like, we fix that online instantly.
Sure.
Although if there's a social media post or something, you can't, edit those things.
You basically have to delete it and then...
you'd have to delete it and repost it, that kind of stuff. But
right.
By that time, you're sort of weighing, like, do we go with the mistake if it's already picked up traction and been shared by, 100 people or whatever. But I think in this case it was a little bit different because we were able to, because we had an e-edition, which means they can change those PDFs, in plenty of time before they go out at, 6 in the morning, Kevin? 6, 7 in the morning?
A little bit later than that.
Yeah,
We're working on that to try and get it a little bit earlier where we'd want it to be, but I usually get the email anywhere from 6 a.m. till 9. So
yeah, if it was a press run, likely would have gone through because you can't, really stop a press run for a name correction.
And name corrections are there's something where people's names, they take that really personally.
Right.
It's a big deal, actually.
Isn't it that thing though that for so many people in the community, you've known them a long time,
yes.
Right? But if you're sort of a rookie on the job, like the first question you ask is, right, how do you spell your name?
Yeah. And to be fair, I will say this, Jennifer with one N was very, very understanding because it happens to her constantly.
But I wasn't I'm not just bugging Michelle.
No,
I
it's
wanted
a big deal,
but I'm not just talking about names.
Yeah.
But it sort of was going to lead me to this point that if you really think about it, we're one of the only industries that readily addresses their mistakes, right?
We have to, right?
because trust is everything.
Wait, we make mistakes? We're human?
Unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
The things Beau says.
Were you not on the phone calls about the story that didn't jump from Thursday? I got plenty of those. Yeah.
I did not get calls. I've gotten my fair share throughout my career.
Right.
And usually I catch those when I'm proofing.
Yeah, that's one. That's a big one. If you're talking about things that just, mistakes bother me to no end, but the stuff that really just irks readers, I think number one is if you mess with their puzzles, right?
Yeah, they're a small subsection. Right. Or smaller, but they're a very livid bunch if you mess with their puzzles or their TV listings.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another one.
Yeah.
One of our previous publishers tried to kill the bridge column once. And oh my goodness. You don't think of bridge as being something that a lot of people play anymore, but let's just say the people who do still play bridge are incredibly passionate.
Well,
and he heard about it.
The demographic for the bridge column, for example, is one of our most diehard. They adore us. They've been taking us for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And, it's kind of, I've been at places where we killed the entire TV guide type thing. And some have been like, okay, no one seemed to care. So we made a right decision. Other people, I kind of feared for safety, and I ran off and hid. I understand that. At the end of the day, as I said when I interviewed with Dale here, is we're stewards of the paper. It's their paper. It's not ours. We'll one day be long gone. So, and some of us may still be here in Stillwater. Some of us may not be. So, it's a time period that we are the stewards of it.
I think that's a really good point. And then also, I don't know if you and I have had this conversation or not, Beau, but I've had this conversation with someone about the fact that, for people, when they do appear in the paper, when their life is documented in the newspaper, I mean, for a lot of people, they don't get a lot of public attention. And so maybe you get mentioned, when you do something great or when you pass away. And it's important to, get the details right. I had one that was really embarrassing recently where I don't know, I was writing late. I was trying to get something in about the Glencoe graduation.
Right.
And I accidentally, John Lazenby is a superintendent at Glencoe Public Schools. And for some reason, I typed George, who was the guy who played James Bond in the first, Casino Royale movie or something. He was like the very first James Bond in films. Now, I do not have the two guys classified together in my brain, I don't think. But for some reason, George popped out, and I didn't even notice it when I read over the story. But one of our readers did. And, they were just like, how do you even get George out of John?
I think I've done that before with some kind of ball player and mixed it up with a swimsuit model's name, and they're like, what's on this guy's brain all the time,
and
right?
Give an example, and I won't mention the paper's name of why we pay attention to that kind of stuff,
right, on
such a minute level. Because if it goes horribly wrong, and this was a sister paper of mine, I'm not even going to give dates because I don't want to call them out. There was a shooting at a school event in an area where gang activity is known. So the police were slow in getting, and not the police fault, in getting us a mugshot. So they looked up the name, and it was a somewhat unique name, but not overly unique, and pulled it from the high school yearbook and ran that mugshot, or not that mugshot, but that picture.
That photo.
Front page.
Which we call a mugshot because it's like head and shoulders. It's your mug.
Center spread, basically.
Right.
As it turns out, there were 2 kids at that school with that name. So we basically, our sister paper, accused the wrong person of murdering 3 people. And that led to, luckily, everybody was so understanding. My whole thing with corrections at that magnitude, not necessarily the name misspelling, but if we have something where we mess up a photo, mess up a headline, is it run, and this is probably good for y'all to know, we run it exactly where it ran. If it ran on A2, it runs on A2. If it ran front page, we run it on front page.
I think that's probably the standard. If you have a correction that major.
Right.
So, because we were all prepared for our sister paper to get sued into oblivion. They didn't, and they ran, but they did attorney up. The attorney called. They ran the correction on A1. But, I mean, that's just, you know what, we were, in our lesson there from the owners was you either wait for the shot, because it was weekly. They had a little bit of time, or we just go without a photo. Right. We don't run that risk of getting something that could be unofficial, even if you think, because they thought they were 100% accurate.
Right.
So
the worst one that ever happened to me was I did a story. I mean, I spent a lot of time with these folks. I went out and I rode on a 4-wheeler with them and took pictures of them feeding their cattle. I mean, this was a labor of love. I wanted to pay tribute to this older couple who was named Farm Family of the Year. And I went out and I did this whole interview with them, and they were lovely. And I was so excited, for this story to come out. And when it came out, I had put the wrong first name in for the wife.
All the more crushing.
It was. And okay, so then the next morning I wake up and there's like a voicemail on my phone, and I'm thinking, and I'm all excited because I'm thinking, oh, they're really going to love this story and this is going to be great and everything. No, it is a really, really nasty phone call from a lady who I don't even know, I've never met before, just ripping me a new one for getting this woman's name wrong in the story. And she's like, how dare you even call yourself a journalist? You should be ashamed of yourself. She said that. You should be ashamed of yourself. These are Payne County people and they deserve better. And I called them and wept on the phone as I apologized. I literally, my voice was breaking as I was apologizing. And, my editor at the time, I think he heard as I was making the phone call, and he was like, I think they know you were really sorry, Michelle. But, and they never followed back up and they never said anything about it. But that has always stuck with me because I was just so excited. I thought it's going to be someone calling to say, hey, that was a really nice story. No, it was not.
Yeah. Would have been a lot easier than in the 60s. You could have just been Mr. and how was it done?
Yeah, she could have been Mrs. whoever.
Mrs. Frank
Yeah,
Smith.
cattle farmer,
right.
yes. That it could have been exactly that. Actually, the news press, we discovered, much to my chagrin, that until the early 70s, that women in the Stillwater news press were not given their own first names, even if they won professional awards for their own work or their community involvement. And that just blew my mind. That within my lifetime, it freaked me out. But anyway, I've never gotten over that, I don't think.
Well, I mean, it's the highlight.
But yes, it was simpler.
It's still the highlight of people's day to be able to pick up a paper and see like their kid's name, whether it was football, academic, or their name or their grandparents' names. So we always need to keep in mind that on the second side of things is why it will be the highlight.
Oh yeah.
If we botch that, it will be on the exact opposite end of the emotional spectrum.
Oh, sure. Well, I remember the lady told me, this is the kind of thing they're going to want to keep, and people at their church are going to cut this out and give it to them, and it's wrong. Her name's wrong in it. And I was just like, oh, I'm sorry.
It's odd though.
It's true.
I've had rough phone calls like that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I don't mind getting those phone calls, or I appreciate criticism, especially if someone catches something that that maybe we hadn't caught, because
absolutely.
It's like, I would rather you see it and let us know than let us go on making the same mistake for months.
Oh, exactly. Right. And also, it does give you an opportunity to apologize and to make it right in whatever way you can. You don't have to cry like I did, but I think
it's a nice added touch.
I think a sincere apology does go a long way. And, the key word is sincere. So you can't just blow it off. You have to really own it and explain how you're trying to make it right. And I think people feel better if they feel like you're actually making a good faith effort. I think that goes a long way.
Every time my son's name is ever ran in the paper for whatever reason, honor roll, didn't matter. Mm-hmm. I've had to correct the name.
Is it a different spelling?
It's not. Well, because every time people nowadays hear Connor, they would go, oh, Connor. No.
With an E?
Conner.
Okay. At least you didn't do some other random vowel or something.
No.
With our upcoming coverage,
yes,
or current coverage, I guess you'd say, we're on the cusp of the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I know Michelle went to, what did they call that? Discussion, but it was sort of an open format for discussion at the Modella Gallery.
It's a type of, I can't remember exactly what they called it, but it's like a community conversation type thing. It's a dinner. And then they will usually have a speaker, or, they're dealing with some type of an issue or a topic. And then you can, they have like a Q&A afterwards as well. And in this particular one, they had Autumn Brown, who is a PhD candidate at Oklahoma State University. She is, she's a historian. She's an archivist. And she gave a presentation on the Tulsa Race Massacre, which was... it was interesting because it was not just what happened in that period of time over those 2 days in 1921. What it actually put it in the context of a period of growing racial tension following World War I. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that there was a resurgence of the KKK during that period of time. You had a lot of black soldiers coming back, having fought in World War I, and now they've seen some of the world. They've been to other places where maybe segregation isn't the norm, where they've fought and spilled blood like everybody else. They've had military training, and they came back, I believe, with an expectation that they would be treated more equally, more justly, which was seen as a threat by some people.
Well, it's also with that, if you look back in the history, and now my mom would be so proud being the American history teacher, but is that soldiers coming back from war, one of the things they're always looking for is that brotherhood feeling again.
Right.
And the Klan really used that with the white soldiers to say, here's where you can have that brotherhood again, which, you talk to a veteran coming back today, it's very rare to find that anywhere else.
Sure.
I'm not saying anywhere else but the Klan. I mean anywhere else but
right.
the
In
United
society.
States military, where,
Yeah.
you are willingly every day putting my life in your hands, your life is in my hands, and there's that bond that grows that
Right.
is it's one of the things they try and use groups for to get people over PTSD, is to give them that bond again, where they have their band of brothers made a huge $1 million+ off of it. Great miniseries, but about that whole concept of
Sure.
of that brotherhood. And you always will find those groups that are on the far fringe of hate, or full-blown hate, or far fringe of this belief or that belief, cults, everything like that, that will take advantage of that, either whether it's after a group incident, like some tried to take advantage of Oklahoma City bombing, because people are raw, they're emotional, and they're searching for connection.
I mean,
Right.
but so resentment builds around the country, but
Sure.
Tulsa is unique in the fact that it's more prosperous.
Right. Exactly.
They benefiting from freedmen and other
Exactly.
things like that.
You had a business district. You had the
Right.
Greenwood business district, which was, which is known as Black Wall Street. And it was a very, very prosperous area in North Tulsa. And, there were people who wanted in on the action. And I think, there was just a lot of resentment, right? There was a lot of racial resentment. If you've got that racism kind of baked into you, and we're not that, at that point, you're only, 50 years past slavery. So for some folks, it was within their lifetime at that point. And, they're looking at Greenwood saying, what gives them the right, I guess. So what happens is, as it often happened, there was an incident involving a white woman and a young black man. It happened in an elevator. And, it's not really clear exactly what happened. There are a lot of rumors that swirl around
and this
about
is
it.
sort of that cursory kind of
Exactly.
the basic that people know. So
Yeah.
I've also said Dick Rowland.
Yeah, Dick
Right, yeah,
Rowland.
I almost saw you.
But basically something happened. Whether, some people say, she tripped and bumped into him and then, got all upset. Other people say they had a relationship and she was trying to cover it up. Either way, he knew this was deadly for him and he ran. He winds up being picked up, put in jail, and a group of black veterans know what's going to happen because they've seen these lynchings going on across the country. For the last few years, they go and surround the jail to protect him, basically.
Even before that, a lot of people point to the Tulsa Tribune.
Oh, yeah.
And they say they
shameful.
Was it the front page? I don't know. The people,
don't know.
So much history is buried, it may intentionally, what historians claim that it was intentionally.
It is bizarre
subverted.
how well
Right.
the city of Tulsa, just as a community, was able to sort of erase this huge, horrible event.
Right. But it wasn't just like this happened.
No,
this happened.
no.
This happened. No, it was
No.
ginned up, and it was all sort of.
No, absolutely.
Churning.
The newspaper
Yeah.
played a big part in stirring emotions. There was already that tension building and building and building, and it had been across the country. And then, somebody struck the match, and boom, next thing you know, Greenwood was basically gone. The New York Times did an amazing graphic this last week that showed, they basically created an interactive map of Greenwood with photos of what it looked like and a list of all the businesses. And then you can go and you can see what it looked like afterwards. So, it was a huge loss.
And, I'm curious now because I don't know how much you touched on it in that discussion, and we're talking something about, buried histories and things like that.
Right.
And a lot of people sort of have been posing this question to themselves and answering it when they first learned about it. When would you have heard about it, Kevin?
I heard it's
And
weird
to
to me
be
to
fair,
hear that it
if
was.
you had your mother was,
it was a cover.
a
Well, I
history
didn't learn
teacher.
it from my mother.
Okay.
I learned it in junior high in Georgia,
Okay.
which is not, that state doesn't have the greatest race relation history either, obviously. Now I was at a private school, but at the same point in time, I don't remember all the particulars, who was involved. The
and at that
elevator.
time, I'm sure
But
it was
I knew
called the
about
Race Riot.
I knew about the 1921. I think it was called the Race Riot. It was not portrayed as a riot per se. It was a mass killing, is how it was portrayed. I'd heard of it. Did I know the details of it? And that was weird for me to come to Oklahoma, and everybody, including, we talked about it at the Rotary Club I was a guest at yesterday, is how, it was kind of a cover-up. It was just briefly talked about because we had a guy talking about notorious crimes in the history of whatnot, and then we kind of went over to that one as well. And I was like, I heard about it. Obviously, I didn't hear about back when it was happening because I'm old, but I'm not that old.
People who went to public school in Oklahoma generally do not remember hearing about it in Oklahoma history.
We can say it wasn't curriculum. It has only now been legislated as curriculum. I did too. I mean, I learned about it in school, but it was because I had a teacher who taught it.
That's right.
That is the case for many of us. If you had the teacher who took the time to teach it.
And I try and take the approach that, at least where I was at, that no one was trying to cover up anything, or anything that happened in Georgia. It just goes, we ask our history teachers, defending one right now, to do a lot in the span of basically 1 year of high school.
Right.
The entire history of our country. I can't even imagine what it would be like if we were like a European country with thousands upon thousands of years. We got a couple hundred. So,
sure.
In what they choose, and you can make an argument for anything they don't choose. That is, but here it seems like it was more of a coordinated effort within the state, where outside of the state, at least for me, it was taught, and it wasn't just in passing. It was like a couple days, and it was linked with like Martin Luther King's assassination, different big-time race pivot points in the country, although it seems like, while we might call it now a pivot point, it wasn't then. Whereas the assassination of MLK was a big moment where a lot of things changed, a lot of people's minds changed, a lot of eyes were open. Whereas with the race massacre, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of eyes were open for quite some time.
Well, it's how many people mentioned HBO's Watchmen as like their first entry into this. That was wild to me. I couldn't believe
that was crazy.
How many people had not heard about that?
I mean, that got national press, right? Where there were people who going, would you believe what happened in Tulsa after watching the HBO series? Because that was their first exposure to it. And, there were interviews with the producers of that who said they wanted to do it, although it's within this, imaginary realm, they wanted to do a realistic depiction. And it sounds crazy when you think about it, but there were literally people flying airplanes and dropping bombs over the Greenwood district. It was an attack. It was absolutely an attack that was meant to obliterate this place. It's kind of strange because I think when you're talking about world history, we're talking, thousands of years, and I can get someone glossing over a lot. But for Oklahoma history, I have to say this. We don't have that much history to cover, and we've got a whole year. We've got like maybe 150 years that they could go over.
Well,
whether you're
that's
going back
a
to
difference
Indian removal
too,
and all that. And so I'm thinking people were kind of picking and choosing. Maybe they didn't know that much about it, and they just didn't feel, unless you had someone who was a really passionate historian. I had a world history teacher in high school who actually brought history to life for the first time. She was a passionate historian. She loved it. And she told you about the personalities of the people and the things that were going on and why they were fighting these wars, as opposed to just memorizing a list of dates. And if you have a teacher like that who's teaching you Oklahoma history, then they would probably, cover a lot of that more in depth, as opposed to this is when the land run was and these brave pioneers came and,
Well, that's one of the unique things of Oklahoma and Texas, which I know they hate to be compared, but they both. Here, Oklahoma history is required. Glossing over that or missing the race massacre in Oklahoma history is unacceptable.
I would say so.
Just like it would be if it happened in Texas for Texas history, because they both require that class. Georgia, Alabama, Vermont, South Carolina, we didn't have those, or at least they weren't required when I lived there. At least there used to be a Georgia history class, according to my mom, that you had to take, but that was long gone. And just the important parts they merged into American history because you started having newfangled classes, as she called them, show up like economics and things of that nature. So, how much do you require to be taken to the point where you've got to get them out in 4 years? So,
sure.
But Oklahoma and Texas are very prideful of their state history. And that's not to say Georgians aren't.
Right.
But we didn't have the class, Georgia history. So, which is funny because now I can be completely blunt about it. I don't know a whole lot about my state's history. I know the big moments that occurred, but I don't know like some that most people might be big in the state, but were minor. I know Jimmy Carter was president. I know he was governor. I don't know a dang thing that he did as governor. I know a lot that he did as president and post-presidency, but I'm sure in a Georgia history class that'd been like a big deal because it's been our one and only native guy who made presidency.
Right.
So.
Well, I would say for Oklahoma, there's definitely been a big awakening. I mean, you're not going to be able to go anywhere this weekend, look at anything this weekend, and probably not read something about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I think there is a sense of trying to make it right and trying to, and by that, I don't mean reparations. I mean, trying to make it right by giving it the recognition of the event by actually acknowledging it and acknowledging what was done. Now, something interesting that came out of this discussion at Modella, though, is that, a majority of Greenwood had been rebuilt within a couple of years.
Right. Yeah, I think, and that's
that's a point that
I've been reading that too.
So when you look at the Greenwood district now, where there's a lot of dilapidation and there are buildings that need a lot of love, and and it's really there's a sense of rebuilding it. This is not all from the Race Massacre. This is not from 1921. A majority of those buildings had been rebuilt within a couple of years, in spite of the fact that hardly any of the damage was covered by insurance. So these people really had to go through and they had to come up with the money to rebuild and scrape it all back together so that they could do that. And there was looting. I mean, there are photos of people standing outside homes that they had burned with a big pile of stuff that they stole from inside. They took all the nice stuff and stole it right before they burned the houses. So, it was just, I'm going to say, an incredibly crappy part of our history. Let's just say that.
It was what zoning, roads?
Urban renewal,
Yeah.
and the building of Highway 244.
Yeah.
It basically cut the district in half. And if you look at the federal highway program, there were a lot of freeways that went through neighborhoods of color or lower socioeconomic areas. Just because, my theory, anyway, is that these are people who are traditionally underrepresented in government and in leadership positions. They don't have a lot of resources to fight, and they're just not going to get a lot of traction in saying, don't build this right next to my house. But what it does is it destroys communities. And urban renewal, as well-intentioned as I believe it probably was, has had incredibly damaging effects on minority communities. We've seen it play out over the last 50 years.
So how has all this you've learned shaped your story?
I guess probably because there's so much of the history of the Race Massacre. I think I'm going to try to look more at Greenwood moving forward from that. And obviously touch on the Race Massacre as a starting point for the decline of Greenwood, but look at it within that larger context. I really like context. I really like
Many
looking
of
at
us
the
do.
big picture. So I think I'm going to try to put it in a little more context so people can kind of see why they're still struggling. Because I think sometimes people look at areas or people who are having a hard time and they go, well, what are they doing wrong? But there are a lot of forces at play. And I think it's important to recognize that.
All right. Well, Stillwater's got big plans, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we do have big plans and hopes. Aside from Block 34, which, we've already talked about.
Which looks like it would be really fun for mudding right now, right? If you got out there in a dune buggy and just
Big old 4-wheel drive
cut some.
truck.
I'm not. People are
Do
going to hear
not-
that. Like, do not do that.
Do
I
not.
was
Do
about to
not
say,
go out
do
there
not.
and
My
cut.
wife and kids aren't
Yeah.
here yet, and I'm looking at
Yeah.
a 3-day weekend with nothing
I
to do.
am not
There you go.
suggesting anyone
Oh man,
go out there
no.
in a vehicle.
When I lived out,
Disclaimer.
when I lived out southeast of town, we would have college kids come out in their Jeeps. We stopped a caravan of college students in Jeeps that were coming down our dirt road, getting ready to pull into our neighbor's pasture and tear the heck out of it, mudding. And when we stopped them, we said, why do you think you can do this? I remember that. My husband said, why do you think you can do this? And they said, we didn't think this land belonged to anybody. And our neighbor, this was amazing. He was standing out in the road in his boxer shorts yelling at them because he came out to help. He was just really
You
livid.
can't own land, man.
And he was just like, he's like, yeah, because there's just all kinds of free land just sitting around in Oklahoma that nobody owns, right?
Yeah.
And they
Well,
were just like,
That's something I
it
think
was pretty
Oklahoma
funny.
has in common with the entire country. I don't know anywhere I've been like, and that land's just there.
Right.
Because if
if there's not a
somebody doesn't
building
own
on it.
if somebody doesn't own it or a company doesn't own
Right.
it, you can rest assured the state or federal government owns it.
Well,
So-
and the fact is, our neighbor grew wheat on it, so it was not great. They were going to tear up his wheat field.
So-
but anyway, so
I
so
I
don't
didn't
go
hear
mudding.
you say wheat.
Yeah.
I was like, now it makes
Oh,
sense that
I'm
the
sorry.
college kids were headed
Oh,
out there.
let me make that clear. Wheat, not
Yeah.
weed.
I was about to say the college kid thing makes perfect sense
You've
now.
got to be careful with the TD thing now. It used to not be as big a deal. But anyway, so yes, there are plans. The City of Stillwater is looking at making improvements in some major areas. One thing we've needed for a while that has been in the works for a while is plans for a new fire station. Also, for many, many years, I've talked about the need for a better animal welfare facility, a bigger one with more capacity. That one has been really overcrowded for a long time. And then also our streets, which are a perennial complaint. And over the years, I think people thought just kind of like we needed to tear up the whole town and rebuild everything. A couple of years ago, the city did a study, a structural assessment of our roads, and found that actually structurally they're not that terrible, but they ride really, really rough. Like the very top part of it is not great. So what they've identified is they've always told me that they had about $60 million worth of road projects that they could name off the tops of their heads that they could do right now if they could write a check for it, that they already identified. You know, so they are looking at trying to raise about $64 million for road projects, but there are different ways to do it, right? Right now we have that 1/2-cent sales tax that's dedicated to the pavement management program.
Right.
But
which
that
is
just maintains
recurring.
things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like $4 million a year, and it just kind of keeps things status quo, keeps them from getting any worse. It doesn't really allow them to make major improvements.
Or address flooding or
address
washouts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Things like that,
anything
yeah.
like that. There are so many things that they just can't even touch.
Right.
So that's obviously not enough. So they're looking at different combinations of ways to fund this. Maybe a combination of a sales tax, issuing some bonds. Our city does not carry a lot of debt right now, and we've got bonds that are getting ready to be paid off. And the fact is, we've got a pretty good rating. I think it's maybe like an A- rating or something, financial rating. So it's a very good rating. And money's really cheap right now. Borrowing money is really cheap right now. I
Yeah.
mean, comparatively to the past.
I just like how you phrase it. Money's really cheap right now.
Well, no, it is. I mean, it's just like I don't think $1 million is
it's-
very much money
It's
anymore.
interesting to me because I've always found concrete roads to be rougher.
Yeah,
And I come from a land of asphalt.
right.
And asphalt, well, there's pros and cons to both.
Sure.
Asphalt's always a smoother ride.
Well,
It's a little bit cheaper to maintain. It's just repave.
yeah,
Versus, I know that Texas, they at least say that the reason they go with concrete is because of the heat issues
sure.
that they have there. You know,
Right.
asphalt does
It doesn't
not play.
melt.
Yeah, it doesn't play well. But
Right.
I know it can deal with like 100, 101 because Georgia sees that regularly.
Right.
And Alabama sees that regularly. So
Right.
I've always found, because, you know, on concrete, you get that.
Concrete lasts longer, But a lot of times, I mean, you don't get that continuous pour, right? It's poured in sections. And so then you've got, and even, of course, with concrete, you have to have the seams anyway, because you can't have that long continuous thing. Whereas with asphalt, you've got that nice, smooth, continuous surface where they just roll it on out. And so that does make a difference in terms of the ride, but the concrete is more durable. So, I mean, they're looking at, I don't know. They're looking at a lot of different things, and I think we'll see a combination. Part of the deal is you've got also utility projects. Like we have aging utility infrastructure that's under some of these streets. So they have to find the money to replace the infrastructure while they're redoing the street, because you don't want to build a nice new street and then 3 years later have that sewer line fail finally and have to dig it all up again and then rebuild everything. So they're really trying to coordinate things and do things in a smarter way. But what this means is there's going to be an ask. There is going to be an ask of the public for some more funding. It's just a question of how they're going to do that, whether it's general obligation bonds, whether it's maybe passing a sales tax and using revenue bonds that would then basically borrow money in advance of the sales tax revenue, then you use your sales tax to make the payments.
Whatever it is, it would require a vote.
It's going to
majority
require a
vote of the people. Yeah.
Right. And so, which means also there is going to be a public outreach.
Yeah, we're in the public outreach stage, right?
This is where we are. And we're going to have some public meetings. There's going to be a lot of education involved. I've actually got 3 stories planned to look at each one of these areas that they want to fund, look at what they actually want to do, what they think it's going to cost, and how they're proposing to pay for it, and why it's needed, basically. The campus fire station at the corner of University and Knobloch is a beautiful old building. It's a local landmark, and it is a horrible fire station to actually try to work out of.
Right. They would not be building on top of that. You know, they're moving it somewhere else, and the original structure, I think, stays because they
it's
use
historic.
And don't they have some of the college fire training stuff that goes through there a little bit, maybe?
Well, at one point they had classrooms up there for the fire service or fire protection program. They don't necessarily do that anymore. They move their living quarters upstairs. But, the bays aren't big enough to put the new ladder truck in. And the ladder truck is actually needed at the university. That's why they have the ladder truck, because of the tall dorms. We don't have high rises anywhere else in town. And so you have to put your ladder truck down at the headquarters station at 19th and Main, which is much further away. The whole idea is that if they can move the fire station over there around Western and McElroy, that it'll be a little bit further west. It will give them better response times to the airport, to far west Stillwater. They'll be able to access some of the bypasses to get around town a little bit faster. Right now, you should see them trying to get those big engines out of the station at that intersection of University and Knobloch. It's pretty tough. Because there's traffic coming all the time. They can't see. They have to literally have people stand in the street and stop traffic so that they can back the trucks in and out.
I think, Kevin, you were here for this when we were talking about, I think we were talking with city manager Norman McNichol. I think he was talking about the animal shelter, and they unabashedly will tell you it is almost in disrepair from
absolutely.
The part of keeping the animals.
He brought all 3 of them up.
Yeah.
When we were there, but that one he was like, "Yeah,
sure.
don't go."
well, remember a couple years ago when the Humane Society had to put some money into their half of the building that they lease, because there was a whole wing that they couldn't use. It was the roof was leaking. I mean, there were just all kinds of things that were going on there. It just is not well done, or it's not in great shape right now. I mean, I'm sure it was fine when it was first built. But, based on the presentation, they said it was almost too small when it was built. It just does not have the capacity that for the volume of animals that we see. And our city strives to maintain a zero-kill shelter. So that is, that's something that's important to our citizens. And in order to do that, you have to have more capacity. They don't even have a good lobby. They don't have good office space. So it's like there's just a lot that's missing there.
So very soon we will find out just what people are willing to support and pay for. And
I would encourage anybody out there who has an opinion, whether they're for it or they're totally against all of it, go to these public hearings.
Oh, yes.
These things, everybody wants government transparency. Everybody wants to give their opinion. But these things are horribly not well attended. It's
that is true.
Sparse at best, and when you do that, you're forfeiting your opinion on that to whomever goes. And usually the people who will go to these things is a very small group who are either on one fringe or the other, who are all for it or all against it with no nuance in between, that they're, hey, the roads really need to take priority or the fire station needs to take priority. Go out there, make your opinion heard.
Right. And I will say that, at a lot of these types of events, you do have what I call the usual suspects who come, and they're, a lot of times they're the people who are really involved in municipal government. They stay up on things, whether it's because they're against it or they're for it, as you said. It's kind of preaching to the choir to a certain extent. These are the people who who the least need to hear it, who need to hear it the least. And a lot of times I'll sit in those things and I'll have flashbacks to like those episodes of Parks and Recreation where they, have the public meetings. And
well, that would be fun. Then it's just folks coming in. But it's not, you're not too off though, right? Because they come in because that's the thing they care about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in whatever case, people come in to support the thing they care about.
Oh man, my father-in-law lobbied City Hall for 10 years over a drainage ditch behind his neighborhood. I mean, when you care about something, you care about it, especially when it's in your backyard or down the street from your house. So, I mean, yeah, if people would get involved, that would be great, and stay up on it. If nothing else, the city council live streams its meetings, and I think most of these forums probably will be too, just because they're going to want to reach as many people as possible.
Or just subscribe to us and we'll take care of that.
If only there were a place where you could find a lot of information all in one place, conveniently, summarized for you.
All right.
Maybe we could help with that.
Maybe that's a new business venture.
We should think about that.
All right. That final pitch is going to do it
All right.
for this episode. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom. Look for Studio Stillwater wherever you find your podcasts. Find archived episodes on stwnewspress.com.